Hello everyone and welcome to my YNR CPS Spoiler Today channel. Please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up because what is coming on Wednesday episode of The Young and the Restless is going to leave you completely breathless. Genoa City has never been a place where people get to live quietly, and this week proves that better than ever. Two storylines are colliding with the force of a freight train, and neither one is going to slow down anytime soon. On one side of town, a young man named Holden Novak is about to have his entire world ripped apart by a secret that has been buried for decades. A secret about who his biological father really is. On the other side, Phyllis Summers is making her most calculated move yet, sitting across from Kane Ashby and dangling an alliance that could either save him or destroy him completely. Malcolm Winters, a plastic anemia, a potential bone marrow donor, a vengeful woman with a business empire, and a desperate man with nothing left to lose. This episode has everything, and trust me, by the time it's over, nothing in Genoa City is going to look the same. Let's start with Holden because honestly, this storyline is the kind of thing that only happens in soap operas. And yet it feels so painfully real that it's hard to watch without feeling something deep in your chest. Holden Novak has spent his entire life believing he knew who he was. He had a father, a family, an identity rooted in something solid. He never questioned it, never had a reason to. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, Dr. Stephanie Simmons steps into his world and destroys all of that in what I imagine was probably less than 5 minutes of conversation. Imagine sitting down with someone you trust, someone who carries herself with the calm authority of a medical professional, and having her tell you that the man who raised you, the man you called dad, the man whose name shaped your understanding of yourself is not your biological father. Imagine the ground just falling out from underneath you. That's exactly what happens to Holden. And the show wastes no time in making it clear that he's not handling it gracefully. He shouldn't have to. This is not a small thing, this is everything. Now the reason Stephanie is coming forward now, and this is the part that really stings, is not because she suddenly felt a wave of guilt or decided the truth deserved to come out on its own merits. It's because Malcolm Winters is sick. Seriously sick. Malcolm has been battling a plastic anemia, a devastating condition where the body stops producing enough blood cells. And his medical situation has become so urgent that he needs a bone marrow donor. Doctors have been working through their options, and Malcolm, being the resourceful man he is, has been seeking opinions from multiple specialists. It makes perfect sense that at some point he would have reached out to Stephanie, a doctor based in Manhattan who also happens to be a former flame, to get her perspective on his condition. And Stephanie, knowing that what she knows, understanding the biological reality that she has kept locked away for years, finally makes the call that she can no longer stay silent. Holden is kept locked away for years, finally makes the call that she can no longer stay silent. Holden is Malcolm's son. Holden could be the match Malcolm desperately needs, and so the truth after all these years finally makes the call that she can no longer stay silent. Holden is Malcolm's son. Holden could be the match Malcolm desperately needs, and so the truth after all these years is forced into the open. Not by love, not by courage, but by necessity. I can't help but feel for Holden in this moment. Because how do you process a revelation like that when it arrives wrapped in an agenda, even if Stephanie genuinely cares? Even if she's sorry, the fact remains that Holden is only hearing this now because someone needs something from him. That has to cut deeply. Holden's reaction is explosive, and rightfully so. Disbelief hits first, because of course it does, because no rational person hears something like this and just nods and accepts it. Then comes the anger, hot and uncontrollable, directed at Stephanie for keeping this from him, for letting him build a life on a foundation of lies, for only speaking up when there was a medical reason to do so. Then comes the betrayal, which is quieter but arguably more painful because betrayal doesn't scream. It just sits there and throbs. Holden walks away from that conversation carrying a weight that no one prepared him for. And the idea of agreeing to be tested for bone marrow compatibility feels in that raw and wounded moment, like it would be an endorsement of everything that was done to him without his consent. He's not ready. And honestly, watching someone be expected to act selflessly in the immediate aftermath of having their identity dismantled is one of the more uncomfortable things this show has put on screen in a while. Meanwhile, the location of Crimson Lights becomes the stage for one of those perfectly timed soap opera moments that feels almost cinematic. Malcolm Winters is there. He has no idea what has just happened with Stephanie and Holden. He doesn't know that the young man whose confrontation he happened to catch the tail end of his own flesh and blood. He doesn't know that he stood within feet of his son, a person who has existed in the world for years without Malcolm ever knowing, and felt nothing more than the vague curiosity of a bystander. The irony of that moment is almost unbearable to sit with. Malcolm, a man who has always valued family, who has fought for connections and mourned losses, who has lived an enormous and complicated life full of love and regret, that man was standing right next to his son and didn't fill the pool. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't understand what it was and didn't fill the pool. Or maybe did. That man was standing right next to his son and didn't fill the pool. Or maybe he did and he just understand what it was. Either way, the universe was closing in, and Stephanie is the one who finally makes the walls collapse. When Stephanie turns her full attention to Malcolm and prepares to tell them the truth, you can feel the weight of every year she kept that secret pressing down on the scene. So, she has to know that what she is about to say will fundamentally. He is passionate, emotional, fiercely protective of the people he loves. And he's about to find out that there is someone he should have loved for years that he never even knew existed. When the words finally come that Holden Novak is his son, the impact on Malcolm is seismic. The disbelief, the anger, the grief for lost time, the desperate need for answers, all of it crashes over him at once. He demands to know why. Why did she keep this from him? How could she have looked at him across all these years, knowing what she knew and said nothing? The questions pour out because Malcolm is the kind of man who cannot sit in silence when silence feels like injustice. And losing the chance to know your own child, to be there for his first step and his mistakes and his milestones. That is the deepest kind of injustice imaginable. Stephanie tries to explain. She talks about her fear and timing and a misguided desire to protect everyone involved. But explanation feels hollow against the backdrop of everything Malcolm has missed. He listens because Malcolm Winters is not a monster. But listening doesn't mean accepting. And then the conversation pivots back to the urgently reality. Holden may be his only shot at survival. Malcolm, to his enormous credit, does not immediately treat this as a transaction. He understands that it would mean to reach out to a son who just this as a transaction. He understands what it would mean to reach out to a son who just learned the truth and immediately ask him for something as intimate and physically demanding as a bone marrow donation. He doesn't want to be that. He doesn't want the first real moment between a father and a son to be transactional and desperate. But the clock is ticking, and Genoa City has never been kind enough to give people the luxury of perfect timing. Now let's cross down. Because while all of this deeply personal and emotional family drama is unfolding, Phyllis Summers is doing what Phyllis Summers does best. She is working an angle with the precision of someone who has been playing this game for decades and has absolutely no intention of losing. At the Genoa City Athletic Club, which has hosted more scheming conversations than most boardrooms in this fictional universe, Phyllis sits across from Kane Ashby and begins her pitch, and calling it a pitch almost undersells it. What Phyllis is doing is closer to surgery. She identifies exactly where Kane is vulnerable, exactly where his pride has been wounded and his ambitions have been thwarted. And she applies pressure with the kind of steady, controlled precision that makes her one of the most compelling characters this show has ever produced. She's not coming to Kane from a place of weakness. She's riding the high of taking the helm at Summer's conglomerate, and she genuinely believes she's steering that company toward something remarkable. She carries the confidence like armor, and she uses it strategically, holding up against Kate's situation with arabesque, which by comparison looks increasingly like a slow motion collapse. She doesn't say it cruelly. Phyllis is too smart for cruelty when calculation will work better. She frames it as honesty, as a reality check from someone who genuinely wants to help. She argues that they are better together. She reminds Kate of their shared history, of the alliance they once had and what it accomplished. And she reminds him pointedly, deliberately, that Victor Newman has betrayed them both. Victor, who duped Phyllis into handing over Chancellor, Victor, who has manipulated Kane in his own right. The common enemy is real, and Phyllis knows that common enemies create the most durable alliances. And then there is the other layer, the personal one. Phyllis doesn't ignore it. That will be dishonest, and Phyllis is many things, but she is rarely dishonest about what she wants. She hints at the possibility of rekindling what they once had on a personal level, but she keeps it light, keeps it optional, frames it as a bonus rather than a condition. She knows that precision too hard on that particular note will break the spell, would remind Kane of all the reasons he should be suspicious of her. So he leaves the hovering. And then there is the other layer, the personal one. Phyllis doesn't ignore it. That would be dishonest. And Phyllis is many things, but she is rarely dishonest about what she wants. She hints at the possibility of rekindling what they once had on a personal level, but she keeps it optional, frames it as a bonus rather than a condition. She knows that pressing too hard on that particular note would be break the spell, would remind Kane of all the reasons he should be suspicious of her. So she leaves it hovering in the air between them, warm and unspoken, letting Kane feel it without forcing him to respond to it directly. That is masterful, and I cannot decide whether to be impressed or unsettled by how good she is at this. Kane, for his part, is fighting a war with himself. He wants to resist her. His pride demands it. Every instinct shaped by past experiences with Phyllis tells him that accepting her offer is the equivalent of picking up a grenade and calling it a gift. But his situation is real. Arabesque is struggling. Victor is still standing, powerful and untouched, while Kane scrapes at the edges of what he had hoped to build. And the anger he feels toward Victor, that is real too, possibly the most real thing in the room. Phyllis knows it. She is speaking directly to that anger, offering it a direction and a partner. Kane is tempted, not just by the strategy, not just by the personal warmth she is projecting, but by the validation of having someone look at his broken situation and say, I can help you win. The consequences of what happens in this episode stretch far beyond when this airtime, and that is exactly the kind of storytelling that keeps audiences coming back week after week. Holden's initial refusal to engage with the bone marrow testing is not just a personal reaction. It is the first chapter of what will inevitably become a long and painful journey toward something that might eventually look like reconciliation or might look like permanent rupture. The show is not going to resolve this quickly, nor should it. The question of what family means when it arrives late, armed with need and apology, is one of the most complicated emotional territories any human being can navigate. Holden is being asked to perform an act of profound biological compassion. Is going to define his character for a long time. Malcolm's situation is equally layered. He is a man fighting for his life, and yet the way he chooses to handle the revelation about Holden says everything about the kind of person he is. He is not immediately trying to leverage the situation. He is genuinely grappling with the loss of years, with the existence of a son, with the responsibility that comes with that truth. Even at this late page, the possibility of redemption is there, but so is the possibility of deeper pain, and the show is wise to let both possibilities breathe simultaneously. As for Phyllis and Kane, every alliance is built on revenge has a shared shelf life, and theirs will be no different. The question is not whether things will go wrong between them, but how spectacularly wrong they will go, and who will be left standing when the dust settles. If Kane agrees to her terms, he is stepping into a partnership with someone who is brilliant, driven, and ultimately self-serving. Phyllis wants Victor taken down, but Phyllis also wants to be, and in that moment, everything stops feeling like a coincidence and starts feeling like destiny closing it. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Secrets don't just hurt when they are revealed. They reshape who you are, and Holden is standing right on that edge, not knowing if he will fall or finally see clearly for the first time. What really struck me is this. This isn't just about a medical crisis. It's about identity being forced under pressure. And when truth arrives only when it's needed, can it ever feel genuine? Or will it always feel like manipulation? And honestly, I don't blame Holden for pulling back. Because when love and obligation get mixed together, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a trap. But here's the twist that keeps pulling me in. Malcolm isn't just fighting for his life. He's unknowingly fighting for a relationship that hasn't even begun yet. And that kind of emotional timing rarely ends cleanly. At the same time, Phyllis and Kane are playing a completely different game, but with the same dangerous fuel desperation. And when two wounded people start calling it strategy, that's when mistakes turn into disasters. If you ask me, Kane isn't just tempted by power, he's tempted by validation, and Phyllis knows exactly how to offer it without ever promising safety. So now the real question becomes, will Holden though choose distance or step into a truth he never asked for? Even if it saves a life. And can Malcolm earn a place in his son's world without making that bond feel like a transaction? And over on the other side is Kane, about to make the biggest mistake of all, trusting Phyllis when revenge is clouding everything. Because here's my prediction, if Holden refuses at first, it won't be end. It will be the beginning of a much deeper emotional collision. One that forces both him and Malcolm to confront what family really means. And that right there is why The Young and the Restless has kept audiences hooked for decades. Because it doesn't just give you plot, it gives you the full messy, complicated experience of human emotion played out under the most dramatic possible circumstances. Wednesday's episode is shaping up to be the one of those our installment where every single scene matters. Afternoon have the power to echo through Genoa City for months. Holden discovering Malcolm is his father is not a one-day story. Malcolm learning he has a son while fighting for his life is not a one-day story. And Phyllis pulling Kane into her orbit of ambition and revenge is absolutely, without question, not a one-day story. Malcolm learning he has a son while fighting for his life is not a one-day story. And Phyllis pulling Kane into her orbit of ambition and revenge is absolutely, without question, not a one-day story. These are seeds being planted for something massive, and I, for one, cannot wait to see how it all grows. So here is what I want to know from you. Do you think Holden will eventually agree to be tested, even after the initial shock? Do you believe Malcolm can build a real relationship with his son? Or is the damage already to keep? And most importantly, should Kane trust Phyllis, or is he walking straight into the most expensive mistake of his life? Drop everything you are thinking in the comments below, because this community always has the best takes and I genuinely love reading every single one of them.